Okay, class, I just wanted to create this video here for you because some people learn well from reading and some people learn a little bit well from hearing. So I want to talk about commas here and coordinating conjunctions and all that good stuff. You probably have heard of coordinating and subordinating conjunctions, or maybe you have. You know, there was like a little song when I was a kid: conjunction, junction, what's your function? Hooking up phrases, clauses so a sentence can function. Anyways, so what we have here is coordinating conjunctions to start off with. All right, and what coordinating conjunctions do, you know them as fanboys. I'm sure that you've been told fanboys right here: for, and, nor, but, yet, so, or. All right. And what those do is when you have a comma and then one of these, they combine two complete sentences, or what, two complete clauses. It could be two complete sentences on their own together, and they tell you what the relationship is between them. For instance, you know, the game was over, complete sentence, right? You could drop a period right there, subject, verb, complete thought, and it's over. But we want to continue it. So the game was over, but the crowd refused to leave. The crowd refused to leave is also a complete sentence. So what this coordinating conjunction does is it combines those things together. Now, there are a few other ways to combine them together. You could cut this out here and put a semicolon. You know, you could drop a period and start a new sentence. You could use, you know, you could use, for instance, the game was over, semicolon, however, comma, the crowd refused to leave. Um, you know, so you could also put a dependent word in there that doesn't require a comma or a semicolon or anything. And that would be something like because or something like that. You know, whatever word fits in this situation. But we'll get to that in a second. So right now we're just, you know, combining these, what could be a complete sentence together with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So there they are. Okay, another very, very common way to kind of make a mistake and lose a point or whatever for many writers is to forget the comma after an introductory clause, phrase, or word that comes before the main clause. So if you can see, most of the time they'll begin with one of these words, but that's not all of them. But a lot of times a word, that can be other words. It could be like one word, like firstly or first, or it's not firstly, sorry, whatever. First, second, you know, that can be an introductory word by itself, or it can be a whole phrase. So what we have here, the whole phrase kind of example. And if you read your, you know, I always tell you when you revise your essay, read it out loud to yourself, because a lot of times you'll hear a natural pause, and that tells you where to put a comma. For instance, while I was eating, the cat scratched at the door. You hear that pause after while I was eating, the cat scratched at the door. Another clue that the comma goes there is because this is our main subject, this is our verb. 99% of the time in the English language, if you have your main subject and your verb and you've got a word or several words before it, not counting the or a, you know, you had the declarative there. If you have these other words before your subject, most of the time, like I said, 99% of the time, you need a comma. You need a comma after a because phrase at the beginning of a sentence, but you do not need a comma when the because phrase comes at the end of the sentence, okay? A lot of people make that mistake. All right, so again, notice here's the verb. Here's the subject, and here's the verb. Got a phrase before it, need an introductory comma. All right? All right, so again, when you have one of these phrases, you know, we call them dependent phrases when I was uh, young, I guess, and now they're calling them a dependent or subordinate clause or phrase. You do not put this comma here, okay? Like I said, like I was just saying up there with because, if it comes at the end of the sentence, you don't need the comma. All right? Except if it is a case of extreme contrast. For instance, she was still quite upset, although she had won the Oscar. It doesn't make sense that she's upset, even though she'd won an Oscar. Look, that's kind of a very, very nitpicky and difficult thing to worry about. Me personally, I'm more concerned that the majority of the time it's going to be where you do not need this comma here. So that's kind of a nitpicky rule to follow there, but somebody could ding you on it a point or whatever. All right. Common introductory phrases that should be followed by a comma include, let's see, I can't talk. Participial and infinitive phrases, absolute phrases, non-essential positive phrases, and long prepositional phrases over 4 words. All right. So basically, you're always safest dropping this comma in after an introductory word or phrase. If you try to kind of think about it where it's going to be like, hey, I've only got a couple of words here before this subject. This comma is optional, and sometimes it is. If you do have like a very short, like prepositional phrase, like in the morning, sometimes it's optional to drop that comma after it, but it's always safest to drop it. All right. Okay. But if it's a prepositional phrase that's under 3 words, like I said, in the morning, technically it's not required. Although you're probably safer doing it in case you do have an infinitive phrase, an absolute phrase, or non-essential positive phrase. Now, an infinitive phrase, just so you know, is anytime you have, to get, like the base form of a verb. That's the infinitive form of a verb, to get. It hasn't been put through a, conjunction, gotten, whatever. So let's see. The, non-essential positive phrases, what those are is a non-essential positive phrase. They don't have an example here, but I will tell you one. Basically, it's like a non-essential positive phrase is well, first, a positive phrase is a phrase that renames the noun. For instance, my uncle, who is a doctor, told me I shouldn't drink even though he's an alcoholic, whatever. Right? So, who is a doctor redescribes my uncle. That's in a positive phrase. If you could cut that out of the sentence and the sentence still makes sense, for instance, my uncle told me not to drink even though he's an alcoholic. See, it still makes sense. The meaning hasn't changed. You have to surround it with commas, but we're going to get to that a little bit later. So don't worry about that right now. Okay, let's see. There are also some common introductory words that require a comma after them, like well, yes, no, however. You can look up a complete list of these. Okay, but again, the general rule is when they come right before a subject, they usually need a comma. Okay. All right. Use a pair of commas in the middle of a sentence to set off clauses, phrases, or words that are not essential. That's what we were talking about just a minute ago, non-essential phrases to the meaning of the sentence. Use one comma before to indicate the beginning of a pause and one at the end to indicate the end of a pause. Here are some clues to help you when you decide whether or not it is essential, and this is important. If you have like a phrase or a clause in your sentence and you can cut it out of the sentence and the sentence still makes sense, that means it's non-essential and it has to be surrounded by commas. Okay. Does it create a pause in the flow of the sentence? Like, my uncle, who is a doctor, told me I shouldn't drink even though he's an alcoholic. That phrase creates that pause. All right. And if we cut it out, the sentence still makes sense, that who is a doctor. Okay. So that's another clue there. If you move the element who is a doctor to a different position in the sentence, does the sentence still make sense? For instance, my uncle told me, well, let's say it's a doctor, no, I mean, that's fine. We'll stay with the original. My uncle told me not to drink, even though he is a doctor. Uh, or my uncle told me not to drink, even though he's an alcoholic who is a doctor. See, it still makes sense, right? So you got to set it off with commas. All right, and here's some examples. That Tuesday, which happens to be my birthday, is the only day when I'm available to meet. So again, going back to these questions right here, if we cut this out of the sentence, does it still make sense? Yes. That Tuesday is the only day when I'm available to meet. Yeah. Does it create a pause? That Tuesday, which happens to be my birthday, is the only day when I'm available to meet. You hear that pause that it creates around that phrase, so you know it needs commas. All right. Let's see. I rely on these two more than this third one, personally. But anyways, this restaurant has an exciting atmosphere. The food, on the other hand, is rather bland. Now, compare and contrast essays oftentimes, even though we're not writing one, require things like on the other hand or in contrast. So if you end up writing that for another class, keep in mind that's going to need commas behind it, because if you cut it out of the sentence, it still makes sense. Whatever. Another common one I see in essays is however. When you have however by itself in a sentence, you got to have commas around it. And I do want to point out that if you have a complete sentence before this however, you'll have a semicolon here and not a comma. Okay, so watch out for that. All right, do not use commas to set off essential elements in a sentence, such as clauses beginning with that. Okay, and so let me explain what an essential element is. An essential element is one that if you take it out, the sentence doesn't make sense anymore. Like we were just looking at non-essential, and that's where you take them out and it still makes sense. An essential clause or phrase or word is one you take out and it completely destroys the meaning of the sentence or alters it. So those never have commas, and you almost never use a comma with that before that. So here's some examples. The book that I borrowed from you is excellent. The apples that fell out of the basket are bruised. Notice no commas. Okay. And again, we'll just keep going. She believes that she will be able to turn that. You see all the that's. Okay. All right. Now, here's the essential elements. Students who cheat only harm themselves. Now, it doesn't have commas this time, like my uncle, who is a doctor, told me not to drink, but he's an alcoholic. Okay. It doesn't, this time, if you take who cheat out of the sentence, it completely changes the meaning of the sentence. It's no longer students who cheat only harm themselves. Now it's like students only harm themselves. Like every student in the world's like, a cutter, hurting themselves or something. It doesn't make sense. Okay. Anymore. The baby wearing a yellow jumpsuit is my niece. All right, if we take wearing a yellow jumpsuit out, we don't know which baby we're talking about anymore. It changes the sentence, so that's essential because it helps us know which baby. The candidate who had the least money lost the election. Okay, now again, if we take who had the least money as just the candidate lost the election, we don't know which one. All right, so we have a list of non-essential things there to help you, examples. All right, all you guys already know that 3 or more things in a list need commas. What a lot of students now do is they've been told that this comma is not necessary. I got to tell you, it is absolutely necessary. The teachers or whoever has told you it's not, don't know what the hell they're talking about. I'm guessing that they decided that we want to make things easier on students, so we're going to let this comma slide. I don't know what, but you have to have this last comma in before the and when you have a list, because if you don't, what it does is it's called the Oxford comma, and what it does is if you leave this comma out right here, it says that these two things, the executive and judicial branches, have a relationship together that they don't have with this, with the legislative. So leaving this comma out implies a relationship between these two things that doesn't exist between these three things. So whenever you have a comma list, you've got to have that one before the and. Even if you've been told in high school or whatever that you don't, you got to have it or it changes the meaning of the sentence, okay? Sometimes you have a comma phrase, right? Sometimes they can even have a subject and a verb. Still got to have commas. Still need that and, okay? All right. Coordinate adjectives are adjectives with equal or coordinate status in describing the noun. Neither adjective is subordinate to each other. You can decide if the two adjectives in a row are coordinate by asking the question. Does it make sense if the adjectives are written in reverse order? Does a sentence make sense if the adjectives are written with an and between them? If the answer is yes here, then you need a comma, okay? For example, he was a difficult, stubborn child. Does it work if you say he was a difficult and stubborn child? Yes, then you need a comma. Does it work if you say he was a stubborn, difficult child? Yes, then you need a comma. Okay, notice here though, if you put an and between these or if you switch them, it does not work. And a lot of times it's going to be like that with colors. They lived in a white frame house. They lived in a frame white house. They lived in a white and frame house. See, it doesn't make sense. Okay, notice again, colors often doesn't make sense. Okay, but here, your cousin has an easy, happy smile. Your cousin has an easy and happy smile. See, it makes sense. Okay. All right. You also use a comma at the end of a sentence to separate contrasted coordinate elements to indicate there's a distinct pause or shift. In other words, usually when you're making kind of a statement of contrast, or I don't know, you can you kind of have to use your ear to hear it. You know, if these terms and stuff are difficult for you, just use your ear. Just read your sentences aloud to yourself. For example, I mean, like, look, there's like 81 rules to commas. You don't have to know them all, but if you get an ear for it and you listen, you know, when you read aloud, you won't have to memorize all these comma rules. You know, you can just hear it. For example, he was merely ignorant, not stupid. You hear that pause and that shift of contrast? Then comma. The chimpanzee seemed reflective, almost human. You hear that comma and that pause? You need it. You're one of the senator's closest friends, aren't you? Need it. Speaker seemed innocent, even gullible. You know, you feel that comma, okay? You feel that pause, so you need it, okay? This is kind of similar. Use commas at the set off phrases at the end of the sentence, or refer back to the middle or beginning of the sentence. Such phrases are called free modifiers, and they can be placed anywhere in a sentence without causing confusion. For example, Nancy waved enthusiastically at the docking ship, laughing joyously. You know, Lisa waved at Nancy, laughing joyously. Okay, now we've got a Lisa and a Nancy, so it gets a little confusing as to who it's referring to. So we want to leave that, you know, in this case, we don't want to use it that way. In this case, we want to say, laughing joyously, Lisa waved at Nancy. Now, this is all about modifiers, and we're going to come to modifiers lately, but basically, it got moved to before Lisa because Lisa's the one that's laughing. All right? Okay. Let's see. I don't know how much this is going to show up in ours, but you know, just notice that after cities and states, you need commas. Dates, you're going to need commas. Addresses, you notice you need commas. Between a title, right? Commas. This one you might use when we get to the research paper for sure. John said, without emotion, I'll see you tomorrow. You know, you like, you may have this in a research paper. According to the research, comma, then your quote. Notice it goes before the quote. Okay. Notice that the period goes inside the quote. All right. I was able, she answered, to complete the assignment. Again, this is like a little interrupting phrase. Notice it has a comma before it in the quotations. Notice we have a comma at the end of the phrase. Okay. Okay, so that's just, you want to look at dialogue and how it works. Again, use commas to, so you don't create confusion. For instance, to George, Harrison had been a sort of idol. You don't want to confuse the person George Harrison, the famous Beatle singer, drummer, guitarist, whatever, as an idol. Okay. You never separate a subject from his verb unless there's some kind of pause or phrase, comma phrase in between them. You never just drop one comma between a subject and his phrase. Again, we don't have two complete sentences here. It's not three or more things in a list. You don't need that comma right there. All right. Also, we just said that, you don't have two more things in a list. Don't put a comma right there. Okay. All right. Again, this is that example I was talking about earlier. We have the subordinate phrase at the end here. You do not need that comma. All right. I know that extreme contrast one's tough. Okay, so I hope maybe just like hearing this a little bit helped you out, rather than just reading the information.